Hey everyone. So today you should be working hard on your portraits as they're due on Monday, April 27th by 2 p.m. And we will again run our critique as we did the perspective critique where I assigned you a discussion group on Canvas and then I'll announce when the critique is posted so you can go take part. This video is going to be the final tutorial. After today I'll just have some check-in videos with you to remind you to stay on track and to meet our deadlines. I'll also be doing a quick review of all of the material we've covered throughout the semester next video. But today I'd like to talk a little more about portraiture, the options you have, what's required, and also I want to briefly talk about a certain method for copying an image that we skipped over because of both financial and time limitations. And then I want to talk about hands and feet, just a little, being the last specific subject I wanted to cover with you before we put a cap on our learning for the semester. So, the light at the end of the tunnel is in sight. We are almost there. Don't give up, just push through to the finish line and do the best you can. So first things first, those images I just showed you were done on brown craft paper, like a paper bag, which I mentioned in the previous video, which would be a viable substrate. And this portrait that you're seeing me do in time-lapse video is done on cardboard, which is another underrated medium. It's already mid-tone, like the craft paper I mentioned, so you can work from middle values towards both dark and light. Mapping value really is a lot of fun, and the nice thing about cardboard is it's all over the place. You probably have a cardboard box somewhere, so you could do a portrait on cardboard if you have the materials. I'm using different types of charcoal and charcoal pencils here. I did my drafting sketch first, and then I jumped into these other mediums. Now, if you recall, the last time I did both a cartoony, bold portrait in marker and then a more naturalistic one in pencil with watercolor, line weight has everything to do with the style your portrait turns out to be. Thick, bold lines, like the ones with the marker, tend to flatten things out a little bit. It's not to say that you can't achieve realism with ink. You certainly can. It just requires a variety of line weight, thick and thin, and more mark making and planar analysis to sculpt the forms into believability. There's room for both styles in art, and both have their merits. And in the end, what's communicated through the elements and principles of design and the way each individual uses them is what makes an image unique and special. So I'm working on the value drawing here, and I've even included a hand in my portrait. If you incorporate a hand in your portrait, I will award you an additional 10 bonus points. So if you're still in the drafting stage of your portrait and you need some bonus points, this is your chance to squeeze a little more out of this project. And as I said, I'm going to do a hand and foot tutorial shortly, so that should help you out a little bit. So I used charcoal and white chalk. I allowed my brown midtone of the substrate to show through. I didn't overblend, and I tried to keep from blending my white chalk and charcoal to avoid muddy grays. I took it out and I sprayed spray fixative and 2 even coats on it on top. And what spray fix does is it seals in what you've done by adding a thin toothy layer of see-through liquid plastic to the surface. And the toothiness will allow me to apply more media on top of what I've already done without interrupting the media that I've already applied. I'm going to map color zones next, and I'm using primary colors. Now, we didn't really dive into color theory in this class because, quite honestly, it's really its own class and requires a lot of study and experimentation. So here's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of color. Yellow, red, and blue are the primary colors, and the colors from which all other colors are born. And I'm going to use those to map temperature shifts in the face. Yellow is light, it's warm, and in this case, the yellow that I'm using has a little bit of a red bias. It's going to be located on the top portion of the face where the head is receiving light. Red's going to run through the center of the face where we see a lot of subdermal or subsurface scattering, as it's called. And by that we're speaking of how the concentration of blood vessels is more visible here through the cheeks and the ears and the nose. Specifically, if light is showing through the cartilage in the nose or the ears, it will appear quite rosy, very red. If you ever notice someone standing in the sunlight, their ears appear very red because light is showing through them. And then blue would be the shadowy areas under the nose, the top lip, under the chin, cooler and more subdued. Once I've done this, I could spray fix it again if I wanted and attempt to map on top of the temperature zones with local or perceived hues, but I'm actually not going to do that as it'll require multiple hours of scrutiny and work. I just wanted to show you how to do this part of it, which is just adding the temperature shifts, and sometimes it's fun to work in a limited palette and do something that's not as naturalistic on top of a drawing that is meant to be a little bit more realistic. It's, that's the nice thing about art. You just kind of make the rules up as you go. Once you learn how to do things, you can do whatever you want. You can, as I mentioned before, break the rules with authority once you've proven that you understand the rules themselves. You can see here some examples of portraiture, specifically sketchbook work done in pencil. I did these like 15 plus years ago. And this is acceptable in terms of the project I'm asking you to do. Color is not a requirement, but it will net you 5 bonus points. I'm always going to tell you what the bare minimum requirements are. Then I'll encourage you to go beyond that because really that's where the real deep learning happens and where the gratifying experience of creating reveals itself. Trust me, it's worth it. Now remember, I mentioned at the start of the semester we only have about 45, 50 total working hours together, which is the amount of time a single drawing could take if it was taken to completion, if not twice that long. It all depends on how far you choose to take it, and recognize and appreciate the time and focus required to produce something of a professional quality. Then just do the very best you can with the time that you have. Now, there is a method for attaining accuracy that is an adaptation of methods used by old masters, such as Albrecht Dürer and Johannes Vermeer. In the case of Vermeer, it's widely speculated that he used the camera obscura, which was a novel invention much like a projector used to reflect a blurry image onto his canvas to get an accurate sketch before painting. In the case of Albrecht Dürer, he used a pane of transparent glass with a grid on it, much like the viewfinder I showed you, to map his subject and to blow them up to the size of his drawing surface. We skipped this method for a couple of reasons. Time constraints. I didn't have the time or the money to create viewfinders for everyone to use, but if you wanted to, you could go to Lowe's or Home Depot, buy a piece of 8 by 10 plexiglass, and have it cut into quarters. They will be 4 by 5 inches, little rectangles, and if you draw a grid of 1-inch squares totaling 20, 4 tall, 5 wide, you can use this to compose images with a dry erase marker, and then grid your larger paper and draw what appears in each square. If you need to, you can cover the rest of the grid to focus on one square at a time. It's a good exercise in scrutiny, patience, and focus. You could print out a photo with a grid on it and use it as your subject. Just blow it up to the size of your substrate. It's really quite simple and can be very useful. I tend to think that copying something 2D is a rudimentary exercise. All the hard work of interpreting planes and values has kind of already been done for you if you're taking a photograph that's already 2D and just redrawing it. So if we'd done the grid, it might have been like our first project, but instead we did something more conceptual and creative. That's the one major drawback of using the grid. It tends to push you in a very rigid technique that ignores expression and interpretation. And while I believe that a healthy amount of both observation through measurement and freewheeling expression is what will make your art the best it can be, we did glaze over that particular technique, and it's something that I just wanted to real briefly touch on with you in case it's something that you're interested in. And finally, the last couple of things I want to walk you through are the rendering of hands and feet. We did gesture drawings, and of course each region of the body could be studied in depth to attain understanding, but the distal regions are the ones that give people the most trouble because they are the most detailed and complex. We've covered portraiture and all the measurements and planes of the features and how they all fit together in brief. Now we'll do the same with the hands and feet. And the hands and feet constitute more than half of all the bones in the body, of which there are 206. There are 26 bones in each hand and 27 in each foot. That's a total of 106. So these distal features are articulated to the extreme, and the hands are the second most expressive body part after the face. We use them to create, to gesture, and most importantly to communicate. A clenched fist, a waving palm, a pointing index finger, a peace sign, a salute. The hands can say a lot. So let's break the hands down and reconstruct them. So we're going to focus on the hands first, hands being very important because it's what we use to draw, generally speaking, and really looking at the hand for what it is. It's a shape with a lot of other little shapes connecting to it. It's like sausagey. There's these links and folds, 1, 2, 3 on each of the fingers. Those are your phalanges. Each of your fingers has 3 phalanges. Your thumb has 2, so it makes it different. Hands are very articulated. They're very detailed. It's what makes a lot of people frustrated when they go to try to draw them. Things you should notice about the hand. The interior of the hand, the palmar side, is concave. And when you look at the back, where the knuckles are, that's the convex side. Now, I could do this, but your hand usually doesn't rest that way. So it's something to consider when you're drawing, even drawing like a central line, almost like we did with gesture drawing, is to consider the fact that one side is always going to be curved inward and the other side is going to be curved over. Every time you go to draw the hand, you have to consider each finger, the thumb, the palm, and then how it connects into the wrist and the angle of the hand as well. You have to consider the knuckles, which we can see there. It's actually the top and the separation between the metacarpals and where the phalanges begin. And then the carpals themselves are your wrist bones. So there are more bones in your hands and your feet put together than there are in the whole rest of your body, which says a lot about why our hands are so articulated. They're so good for doing things, for grabbing, moving things, creating things, which is why we also should spend time drawing them, because they're such an important aspect of how we live. So don't overlook them. Don't get frustrated by them. They're actually really fun to draw, and they are the second most expressive part of the body, next to the face. Because the face has all the expressions, but your hands, we use our hands to communicate a lot. Sign language, it's an entire language just based around the movements of the hand. Hands are important to learn how to draw. So what we should do is consider a couple things about the hand itself. Measuring from the base of the palm to the knuckles should be roughly the same size as from the knuckles to the tip of the middle finger. And your hand, actually, if you were to line the bottom of your hand up with your chin, the top of your middle finger will come up about halfway in the middle of your forehead. So it's like 2/3 the size of your head. So that's about how big hands should be in relationship to the form. Now the foot is a little bigger. From heel to toe is going to end up being about the same height as one head would be. Again, we're always using measuring units within the form to help us figure out where everything should be or how big or small everything should be. Measurement is important in figure drawing so that you eventually start to see it kind of naturally. It becomes common sense to you. The middle finger is your straightest and longest finger. If you notice, all your other fingers tend to curve sort of inwards towards that finger, towards the middle. The thumb protrudes from the wrist. It's at an angle. And if we were to draw a line downward towards the wrist, following the exterior line of the index finger, and then draw like an isosceles triangle, that's like not a 90 degree, it's like a 45-degree angle extending from the wrist, that would line up with where the thumb would be. And you can look, if I put my thumb flat up against my hand, the tip of my thumb tends to line up just above where my index finger begins. It's like right above the fold there. So it's a little bit taller than the palm, just a bit. The metacarpals and phalanges radiate upwards from the carpals. So you could draw a series of lines whenever you're going to do this to help you sort of figure out placement. And the phalanges, 1, 2, 3, they're called that because of the phalanx formation. The Spartans, they would protect one another when they lined up side by side with their shields. And that's kind of the idea. The phalanges are like the little soldiers in your fingers all lined up behind one another. So understanding those bones, and I think I put something on here that you can see what the bones look like, is going to help you figure out how to draw the hand. Just look where you can see the bones kind of through the skin, where you can feel them, those landmarks, as we would call them. Let's sketch a couple things here. Whenever I do this, whenever I go to sketch a hand, I'm always considering which side of it I'm looking at. So perhaps I'm looking at the palmar side. Remember we said that that central line would be concave. And I'm going to break this up as though it's a large shape. I'm drawing that sort of oval shape, but I'm also making it kind of like a cylinder. So I know that here is where my wrist is going to connect into my arm. And I know that somewhere on this side is where my thumb is going to be. Remember we said that it's going to come out at like a sort of a 45-degree angle away from where the index finger is. And I'm just drawing straight lines to indicate where my fingers are, just so I have an idea of where to place them. From there, I can sort of chunk this up into cylinders on top of what's already there. And they're truncated cylinders because they start wider at the base and they get smaller as they go up. That's why your fingers taper. So I could draw one cylinder. That would be this one here. This would be the second one. That will be the third one. And then the top one can even be sort of like a cone because this will be a little bit rounded on the top. Yeah, I'll just draw another cylinder on top of that, and then another one on top of that to indicate where my index finger is. And look at where they actually stop. Like here's my first cylinder on my index finger. The one on my middle finger goes up just a little bit higher because the finger's a little bit taller. So I'll make it a little bit taller there, a little bit taller there, and there's the tip. Go back to the ring finger, close to the same size as your index finger, and you put that in there. Remember the bottom of this final cylinder, I always kind of curve it out and make the top part a little bit flatter, because that's where your nail will be, your fingernail. And then our pinky finger a little smaller than the ring finger. I'm going to come down and get the thumb now, and I'm going to look at it as though the thumb is like connected to this meaty part of the hand on the side here. There's going to be two phalanges for the thumb. There's 1 and 2. One of them is going to be right here, and then the other one I'm going to put right there. And then this back part of the hand also has that sort of chunk, meaty part to it. And then there's this portion of the hand as well. So you've kind of got it blocked in now. I tend to make my fingers a little bit longer than maybe they should be sometimes. I exaggerate things a little bit. That's okay. We can always step back from that if we need to. That's something that I would scrutinize if I were actually attempting to make something look realistic as possible. I do a lot of measuring, sight measuring, just really paying close attention to the little things, the details. And here I'm going to just go around these shapes that I've created. There's where my nail will be. There's a fold right here. It's the palm side. Go over those parts where I intended for there to be folds and bumps, and then the fingers themselves, from where the knuckle is, comes up. There's a bump here, and then another one here, lightly putting in those folds so I understand where they belong. And the more of these you do, the more sense it will make. You kind of have to just draw the hand a whole bunch of times before it will really start to make sense in your mind how to draw it. Maybe you won't be so intimidated by drawing all these little parts. So what if we have it kind of going over like this? I'm going to look at the top of the hand this time, and I'm still going to start with that same shape that kind of looks like a cup or like a flat cylinder, like a flattened cylinder. I'm going to draw the thumb coming out, but I'm going to curve it a little bit towards center. Got my index finger, my middle finger, which will be the straightest. And then over all the other fingers curve towards it, and then my wrist goes back. And then from here, once again, making those cylinders. And this time the top part's the flat part, so the bottom is going to be where the bulge is. I'm just going to draw these in. And this part's very gestural, very loose. It's going to help to keep your fingers from looking too stiff. I really do encourage you to be sketchy to start. I think the sketchiness will go away over time as you get more accustomed to drawing these things. Now here's where the phalanges terminate and where the metacarpals meet with them. So this is where our knuckles are going to be. There's going to be one here, 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 and here. And then it's going to go back into the palm of the hand. Thumb's going to come out at an angle, then come back inward. See how I curve that? Because there's the flat part here for the nail, and then it curves back inward towards the palm of the hand, and then the wrist comes back. So now I'm going to come back over this real quick with my darker marker. You can even draw a couple of these lines, because you will see them once in a while. You will see those little indications of where the metacarpals are. And then you can come in and look at where your fingernails are. Then you can also come in and indicate where folds, the articulation of each of your fingers are. What if it's bunched up in a ball? It's making a fist. Where does your thumb actually overlap? Same idea. I'm still looking through the form. It's more blocky this time. It's almost like a ball or like a square connected to the wrist. I'm still going to imagine I can see through it though. And I can see that flat cylinder. And that each of these fingers is curving up over. And my thumb's going to come out at an angle, curve in front. And I'm still going to look at it as though it's these cylinder shapes that are overlapping. See how loose I'm being about this? And each of these sort of concealed. I'm putting in just the indication of the fold where they're curved over. You see I'm drawing this line, indicating that there's a plane going back towards the palm of the hand, which is where my fingers are sort of tucked into the palm of the hand there. So I've drawn that. Let's draw one bigger. I'm going to do this one, like I said, starting off with that sort of curved cylinder shape. It's flat. It's going to connect into the wrist, and the wrist is going to taper and then go outward. The thumb is coming away at a 45-degree angle. The middle finger, the second one, is always going to be the straightest. The other ones are going to curve towards it ever so slightly. And remember the height of the palm, that should be the top of my middle finger. So I need to actually make these a little bit bigger. Stretch out my fingers a little bit more. There. So that's the length of my longest and straightest finger. Now everything else can be done according to that. Meaty parts of the palm of the hand, you kind of put those in like big circles. And then you want to look at how your thumb kind of comes out at an angle from the wrist. And curves up. And then back and in towards this part of the hand. I'm drawing this at a weird angle. I don't know what it looks like to you guys. Hopefully it looks proportional, because I'm kind of sitting at like a weird 3/4 view angle so that I can have the camera set up above my head. And then I'll put in these lines, indications of there's folds and muscles. Of course, adding value and line weight to these is always going to make them look that much stronger. So knowing that you have the ability to use those mark-making techniques and round things out. I'm always curving in the direction of the plane, where the plane terminates or rolls over into another area. Always come back to those foundations, those things that we've done a ton of times, because there's a reason that they're considered foundations. They're always going to be important. They're always going to be something that you're going to build off of. I'm going to do one more over here. You get the idea. So drawing hands is a great exercise in just paying attention to folds, detail, directional shifts, and understanding the underlying structure where the bones are and everything. So give this a shot. Try a couple practice ones in your sketchbook. And if you add a hand into your portrait drawing, if you've already started drafting and maybe you haven't started committing any permanent media to it, maybe that's not part of your plan. If you can add a hand in there doing something, giving the peace sign, I don't know, giving a thumbs up, something like that. Incorporate a hand into your portrait drawing. If you do that, I will give you an additional 10 bonus points. Now let's take a look at the foot. It has all the same types of bones as the hand, with just a few little differences to take note of. Alright, so I've really lightly sketched some feet on here. And yes, we need to talk about feet, even though I know some people have an aversion to feet. Yeah, feet are a little weird. But really, they're just hands below your knees. They have basically all the same kinds of bones in them. They have almost the exact same number of bones, so look at them that way. In fact, you can look at your big toe as being essentially your foot thumb, because much like your thumb, it has 2 phalanges. All of your other toes have 3, even though they're smaller. So it's very similar to the hand in that regard. If you look underneath the pad of your foot, the pad of your foot has these bumps kind of like the palm of your hand. Well, there's carpals and metacarpals in the hand. Well, there's tarsals and metatarsals, the letter T being the difference. T for toe, so tarsals, metatarsals. So you get the tarsals in the ankle, and then the metatarsals are the long foot bones that lead into the phalanges of the toes. One of the big differences between the foot and the hand is this large bone back here called the calcaneus, which is your heel bone. It's a prominent landmark. Something else to take note of when you are thinking about drawing feet is that you've got ankles to either side. The interior ankle is usually at a slightly higher position than the exterior ankle. And that has more to do with the bones that are connected to it, the tibia and fibula. Since we're just worried about the feet, we aren't getting into crazy amounts of anatomy here. Just keep in mind that the interior higher, exterior lower. So I'm just going to draw these feet real quick, and you can see kind of how I approach a front 3/4 and side view. So a front view that I have here, I'm drawing the leg down, and I've got my ankle bone in there. And see how I just draw these little indications of where things fold over top of one another, showing that there's folds in the skin, displacement, changes in the musculature and where the bone structure is. The big toe comes out at a slight angle. I'm always going to be drawing the nail on the big toe because we're always going to see the top of the big toe because the big toe kind of sits up and the other toes all curl inward and down. Okay, so you've got the big toe, and then next to that, all the other toes are going to curl inward and down towards the ground. And draw that little bit of padding on the outside. And you can draw your, those long, thin toenails there, so you can indicate that you can see them, even though they're all curved back and inward towards the ground plane, whatever your foot's standing on. And I'm putting these bumps in kind of like knuckles, but there's a foot coming forward. Let's do this one in profile. Down, an angle, and then making a point to draw this calcaneus, this prominent heel shape. And I'm going to put in my ankle as well, about halfway down. Just little lines make such a big difference in terms of how you're communicating something. I usually will put a secondary line under here when I'm drawing the pad of the foot, just to show that there's some curvature and that there's something underneath. And I'll have it curve inward and then back outward at the top here to show that these bones have some structure. And then from here, I'm drawing the big toe far away on the other side here. I put that in. See how it's facing up, so you can see right here, you can see the top, you can see the nail, and then all these other toes, you just kind of put them in 1, 2, 3, there's my pinky toe. And they all curve down towards the floor. One more. Same idea as drawing the hand. Like when I did this, I was drawing these radiant lines, I was drawing the base, and you can do this sort of the way that I did this one. I drew the wrist whenever I drew the hand up here, so in this case I'm drawing the leg coming down to the foot, and you can kind of cap it off, like put like that ellipse there to show that the cylinder at the end of the leg is right here, and then from there you can start the foot, you can do a ball for the calcaneus, you can do another sort of ball shape for this part of the foot, have it come down at an angle, draw the big toe, and then just kind of reinforce that arch going like that. And then, depending upon which foot you're drawing, in this case I wouldn't be able to see the toes if the big toe was on this side, or just put them in there like that. See, I'm always putting this little bit of a bump here, kind of like how the thumb bulges out, not to the same extent, obviously, when you're drawing the foot, but it does still do something similar. You notice the similarities between your hands and your feet the more you draw them. So if we were to do a figure drawing class, for example, I don't know how many of you would be interested in something like that. Maybe this is the last drawing class you'll ever take. Maybe it's my fault. That's fine. Maybe you enjoyed this and you want to do more. This is what we would focus on. We would focus on the human form, and we would be focusing on separate parts, figuring out how we can best go about drawing it accurately. And it requires a lot of attention to detail, it requires a lot of focus, and a lot of repetition. Give it a shot. So if there is a project you did not turn into me yet, the absolute deadline for turning that in is going to be Wednesday the 29th by like 2 o'clock. So you got to turn it in by then if you want to get partial credit, half credit in this case, for a late project. And the last thing I wanted to mention to you guys is sketchbooks. because it's not possible for me to physically leaf through 25 sketches in each of your sketchbooks and write some type of response and draw you a picture like I normally do and give you an actual evaluation of your skills, which I think is more important than a letter grade. I'm sorry that we can't do that. I wish we could. It's something I look forward to doing at the end of every semester. However, if at some point over the course of the last however many weeks it's been since we haven't met, you asked me about it, I still encouraged you to keep up with it. Yes, that was my evil plan, was to trick you into doing more drawing. Of course I did. I'm an art teacher. You don't have to turn in your sketchbooks to me. In fact, the caricature project and then the gesture drawing project that I gave you guys, the two of them taken together, I gave you points for them that were the equivalent of the amount of points you would have gotten for the sketchbooks. If you turn those in, you're in good shape. Now, the sketchbooks were initially going to be worth 75 points, which is because I asked you guys to do 25 sketches in the sketchbook minimum, they would have been worth 3 points apiece. If you did keep up with the sketchbook and you really want to show it to me, I don't have a problem with you taking pictures of all your sketchbook pictures. Make sure you put them into a PDF, like a multi-page document, before you send it to me so you don't clog up my inbox with like tons of pictures. I will give you bonus points for every sketch that you did. So for those of you who during the first half of the semester missed some classes or missed a project or something like that, here's another opportunity, yet another opportunity for you to make up for that through the sketchbook. I'll allow you to use it and fill in those gaps, 3 points a sketch. You'll need to take good pictures of them though, and I mean it might even be easier for you to do like a video and flip through. And what I'd like you to do is call out the number and the name of the prompt that you're showing me so I know what they are. That sketchbook assignment is on the last page of the syllabus, which is available on Canvas under the Files link. So you can always access it there if you didn't get around to it and now you're like, oh no, I better do it so then I can get some bonus points and make up for those absences I had or that project that I missed at the beginning of the semester. So let it not be said that I haven't given you every possible opportunity to bring your grade up with extra credit, because between the color option, the addition of the hand, the turnaround project that I mentioned with the 3 characters in the environment, the sketchbook, all that taken together, that's like 120 potential bonus points that you could acquire before our class ends on the 29th, which for some of you would make up for all the absences that you had at the beginning of the semester and maybe even like a project or two. So that was pretty nice of me. I know it's a hard time for everybody, but I've been trying to be a little bit more strict about these deadlines, but also lenient in terms of, keeping in mind that some of you are not used to this, or you don't have good internet, or, you guys haven't really communicated any of that to me, so I'm just going to assume that it's business as usual. That's what I'm going to assume. And that if you need the bonus points, you will chase them down. The end is in sight. So if you have any questions, or you want some kind of in-progress feedback about your portrait, you can send me an email with your picture. Ask me any questions you have. Otherwise, just get it done and get it to me by 2 p.m. on Monday, the 27th, and then I'll set up our critique, send the announcement out. You can do critique, and I may have a brief questionnaire, like an end of the semester questionnaire to have you fill out that I would appreciate your feedback on. But other than that, that'll be it. So this was the last tutorial. From this point on, it's just check-in and making sure you're on the right track. Okay? All right, guys. Be well. And hopefully the weather is going to be shifting soon. Get outside and get some fresh air and enjoy the nature just outside your door. See ya.